Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to webinar number 4 of 2017. This evening we're going to discuss incorporating physical literacy in grassroots programming. My name is Billy Wilson. I'm manager for player development, and joining me this evening online is Dave Kelly and Sonia Carvello, regional managers of player development. They will be on hand to answer any questions you may have. So if you do have a question, I would ask that you use the question box, and Dave and Sonia will get back to you and respond to your question. Okay, so each year a physical literacy or physical activity report is provided, which basically assesses the physical activity levels and the impact on society across Canada. In 2016, it was determined that only 9% of Canadian kids aged 5 to 17 get the 60 minutes of heart-pumping activity they need each day. Childhood obesity is rising, and inactivity among youth does threaten the future of health in Canada. Currently, our health budget is $7 billion, which is targeting obesity-related illnesses and chronic disease. So only 9%, it's a very small amount, I'm sure we'd all agree, and it's something that has to be tackled now by everyone. So when I say everyone, we're referring to schools, sports organisations, and even parents at home, to ensure that a generation of, or the next generation of Canadian youth are subjected to physical activity, and therefore given the opportunity to engage in sports and recreational activities that will develop physical literacy skills. So if we take that 9% of children as the starting point here, we've got huge implications for Canadian society. Ultimately, with 91% of children inactive, which is a direct correlation with obesity and sedentary-related chronic illnesses. It's also important to understand that being physically active later in life depends on having the confidence in the activity setting, and the confidence usually comes from having acquired fundamental movement skills for that sport. So if we aren't having kids involved in activity and building those fundamental movement skills and that physical literacy, it's very unlikely that they will have the confidence or the competence to be involved in sport environments. If kids are inactive, obviously there's lots of problems or implications with that. Health is number one. Physical health, we've got people who are obese more than ever before, and that's going to be a huge strain as we go forward in terms of our economy and our National Health Service. Right now, $7 billion is our budget, and that's projected to increase to tackle these physical health implications as we go forward. Also, we look at sleep and performance in classrooms. So cognitive development of young children is directly impacted by sleep and physical activity. So those kids who aren't getting the recommended amount of physical activity aren't getting the recommended amount of sleep each night. And actually only 33% of Canadian youth are considered to be getting the recommended 9 to 10 hours of sleep each evening. This obviously a lack of physical activity and an increase in inactivity, so sitting, playing video games, watching TV, leads to poor sleep patterns and chronic sleep loss. And all sleep deprivation includes fatigue, shorter attention spans, and slower cognitive processing. So if you think about the kid then in this classroom environment, they're a lot slower to problem solve, and as critical thinkers is really impacted. So kids who are physically active and do sleep well, so get that 9 to 10 hours that is recommended each night, outperform those in the classroom and those other children in standardised IQ tests. So it's a very distinct correlation between physical literacy, physical health, and also mental health as well. And it's huge implications for society. So before we begin to discuss more about physical literacy, it's important to draw the line between fundamental movement skills, define fundamental movement skills, and also discuss how it relates to physical literacy, because a lot of the time the terms are interchangeable and often mistaken for one another. So fundamental movement skills are movement patterns that involve various parts of the body. They provide the basis for physical literacy. Fundamental movement skills is not physical literacy, but it is the basis of physical literacy. So as you can see on the screen, this is a diagram from Physical Health and Education Canada. And essentially, if you can't run, catch, jump, you won't be able to take part in sports such as soccer, basketball, squash, badminton, etc. And if you can't catch, throw, swim, you won't be able to take part in other sports as well. So these are all fundamental movement skills that are required to enable young children and adults to access a variety of different sports, because most of these fundamental sports skills are transferable and apply to multiple sports. So in a nutshell, fundamental movement skills is the foundation or the foundation movements or precursor patterns to more specialised and complex skills used to play games in specific sports. So ultimately, fundamental movement skills are the motor skills of a performing action. Fundamental movements are mechanical and they are removed from decision making or any cognitive process. So just the ability to catch, there's not a cognitive process, that's a motor skill, that is therefore a fundamental movement skill. So although fundamental movement skills are very important, physical literacy is certainly not simply the acquisition of these fundamental movement skills. It's more complex than that. It does involve cognitive processes, or what science calls executive functions. So we've discussed and we've agreed upon fundamental movement skills and how that differs from physical literacy. Another myth that we get in sports environments is just because a kid is physically active, then therefore they're physically literate. And that's not the case. 77% of children in Canada participate in organised sport. However, only 44% of those children are considered physically literate. Playing sport isn't enough. It definitely helps. Being engaged in physical activity is certainly a requirement to become physical literate, but just because you're engaging in activity or sport doesn't mean you're physically literate. Physical literacy isn't just about playing the sport, it's about having the ability to move with competence, confidence and motivation in a variety of physical activities in multiple different environments. So different environments could be different weather conditions, different surfaces, indoor, outdoors, on a soccer field or on a basketball court. It can also apply to ice and snow, so winter sports, and also swimming. So it's very holistic, physical literacy, and it applies, it refers to multiple fundamental movement skills and cognitive processes that are involved across a wide variety of environments. So just sticking with the three words that really jump out: motivation, competence and confidence. Motivation applies to the individual's consistency in developing a motivation or ability to understand and analyse different forms of movement in different environments and how those environments change and the movements change accordingly. Competence and confidence refers to the degree in which the individual player can demonstrate a variety of movements confidently and competently, but also creatively and strategically, again in a wide variety of physical environments. So physical activity is important for developing physically literate players and children. However, only 44% of those children in physical activity or organised sport are actually physical literate. So working on fundamental movement skills or playing a sport isn't enough. There's more to it, and it's that cognitive functions. So the executive function refers to the cognitive processes that occur at the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is where all the critical thinking and analysis goes on. Executive functions, specific cognitive processes in this area of the brain include impulse control, working memory, cognitive flexibility, emotional control, self-monitoring, planning and prioritizing, task initiation, and organisation. For the benefit of physical literacy, what we are going to do is we're going to focus on 3 of those. So impulse control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. And these 3 functions work in hand with fundamental movement skills to create physical literate children or humans. So just to touch on inhibition control, and what do we mean by that? Inhibition control essentially is the ability to interrupt an automated response, control one's body, and resist any sort of external distractions that may be going on. So inhibition control helps a child to think before acting, or an adult to think before acting physically. So players with weak inhibition control might react inappropriately in any given situation, and are more likely to engage in riskier behaviour than a child with good inhibition control. So a couple of examples on the screen for inhibition control. We have a face-off in hockey. So you've got 2 hockey players primed, ready to battle for the puck, but they must keep their emotions and movement in check. So although they're primed for action, until that puck's released, they're not going to actually start to engage in any physical activity. So they're primed, they're ready, they're in control of their emotions. Another example could be the sprinters coming out the blocks. So they're ready, they're primed for action. They understand what's required and what movement is required. However, they're not going to go until that gun's heard, so they're again in control of the situation. Working memory is the second part of the cognitive process involved in executive function. And this is the capacity to hold and work with multiple pieces of information at the same time. So working memory helps an adult or a child keep key information in the front of their mind. And players with weak working memory will have trouble remembering directions or working with multiple pieces of information simultaneously. So an example, a soccer-specific example, we've got Christine Sinclair here. She's just challenged for an aerial ball and she scored a goal. So in terms of working memory, a good example here. So as that cross is played into the box, Christine Sinclair is having to deal with all the information and intake associated with the task of heading the ball onto the goal or into the goal. So stuff like the height, the speed of the ball, the defender's positioning, the goalkeeper's positioning, and the distance from the net are all things that Christine has to think about before she actually executes the task. And in this example, we're looking at the ability to jump, which is a fundamental movement skill, and also the ability to head the ball. So again, that's a sport-specific skill. So I hope you're understanding that we've got fundamental movement skills and fundamental sport skills that come in to play here as she scores the goal, but there's also a lot going on cognitively in terms of the decision making, when to jump, the timing of the jump, and reading the environment around her. So there's a lot more going on cognitively than simply just jumping, which is a fundamental sports skill, and executing the header, which is a soccer specific skill. Last but not least, cognitive flexibility is the final part of the executive function as far as physical literacy is concerned. And cognitive flexibility is often referred to as flexible thinking, and it's the ability to switch easily and quickly between different ways of thinking or observing a situation. So it's about seeing things from different perspectives, and adapting to those perspectives. And this refers to the ability to react to the environment around you. A player will be able to adapt and react differently to the situations as they are presented. A good example, again, working with the women's national team here. So a player's through 1 versus 1 or got an opportunity to score on the goalkeeper, and as they're primed for that shot, they're able to recognise what's required to execute that sport-specific kicking or shooting, but they're also able to recognise the movement of their environment, which would be the goalkeeper, and they'll be able to shut that completely down and use an alternative fundamental movement skill. So it's the ability to analyse the situation and shut down the motor skill and switch tasks easily and efficiently based on, in this example, the goalkeeper's movement. So perhaps instead of shooting the ball, the player can cut inside with their right foot and play the ball into an open goal. So it's just an example, a soccer-specific example of cognitive flexibility. So physical literacy, we've now established what it is. It's fundamental movement skills plus executive function, which equals physical literacy. And it's all about essentially getting players to move with competence, confidence, and a wide variety of physical activities in multiple environments, which is really key. So although fundamental movement skills are important, that is only the basis or the foundation of physical literacy. The cognitive processes known as executive function are so important when we are trying to teach and when we're trying to develop physical literacy in our youth. So now that we've established what it is, how do we assess whether players or children are physically literate? Because as we mentioned, physical activity doesn't mean physical literacy. There is a great tool that's been developed by Physical Literacy Canada. It's called Play for short, and it looks something like this. So it's the Physical Literacy Assessment for Youth. That's what it stands for. This is just an example for children aged 7 and up. There is different rubrics and evaluation assessment tools for players of younger and older ages. But essentially, this is a great way of using a rubric and a database to calculate or assess where your players are in terms of their physical literacy and their development. So if you go on the website, if I go back one slide, the website at the bottom here, it'll explain the process. It'll also give you access to all the tools, and there is an available database. So if we come back here, there is a rubric, a grading rubric that is available that accompanies this assessment form, and it's a great way of just assessing whether your kids are physically literate or whether they've still got some work to do. So we've established whether our kids are physically literate or not. As we say, only 44% of kids across Canada are actually considered physically literate. So let's think, how are we going to train and improve physical literacy in our own environment? And I think before we do that, we have to cast our mind back to when we were children. In previous generations, how did they develop physical literacy? I mean, I can speak for myself, and I mean, we were playing outdoors a lot more than children are in the current generation. We were climbing trees, but we're also falling out of trees, so we're learning those fundamental movement skills of climbing, coordination, balance, but also the ability to fall over and get back up. And it's so important. I don't know how many times I've seen young soccer players fall over and struggle to actually get back up. Now that's a fundamental movement skill that's applicable to all sports. And if we don't teach kids that ability at a young age, we're going to struggle to give them access to soccer or another sport environment as they move through into their teenage years. So swing parks are empty these days. Very few kids are out playing on their own. There's lots of different factors to why. Society has changed. There's societal issues that maybe weren't as relevant when we were growing up or previous generations. But I think we have to stop romanticising about the past and how children have to get outside and play more, and understand that reality is these kids aren't going back out. There's very many distractions for them. There's more alternative forms of entertainment. There's video games, TV, kids want to watch movies. So there's other inactivities that they can take part in. So they're not going back out to play, so it puts even more emphasis on us to create environments that simulate the environments that we had in past generations to develop physical literacy. So we learn the majority of physical literacy through play. And I think that's a very important starting point, that physical literacy, again, it's not fundamental movement skills, so we don't want to train it in isolation. Fundamental movement skills and physical literacy can be developed through play. So the example on the screen with the girls using the jump rope, the young girl climbing the tree, and obviously just free play in the park. So deliberate play and trial and error are the number one forms of #1 forms of development for physical literacy. So just to kind of summarise what we're dealing with here. So if we look at the ability to perform any movement, we have the cognitive processes, which is the observation and decision. These are the executive functions. So no matter where a player is before, or what sport a player is taking part in, before that execution of the fundamental movement skill, let's use jumping for example, there has to be an observation to read the environment and also a decision to perform that fundamental movement skill, which is only 1/3 of a skill equation. So regardless of the sport, the first part of any movement is to read the situation to get a complete assessment of your surroundings or potential options. Part 2 is a planning stage. So this is where young children or players strategize on how they will solve a given problem. And finally, part 3 involves the execution of that fundamental movement skill. So regardless of the success or failure, it all starts again, and that's demonstrated with the arrow. So it's important to recognise that fundamental movement skills never exist in isolation in any sport, and it's only 1/3 of the components that make up physical literacy. So fundamental movement skill is accessible on demand. That is what we're looking for, and that's ultimately physical literacy. So when we're working with players, it's very important that we recognise the certain training requirements and windows of trainability at the various different stages of development. So for example, strength out here between 17 and 18 on the male side, strength on the female side occurs a lot younger. So as a coach working with these players to develop a holistic physical literate player or child, it's important that we recognise the various windows of trainability. So it's important to recognise that females physically mature earlier than males. That's biology and it's a fact. So the skill set or the development windows for the females occur a lot earlier than they do chronologically for male players. So peak height velocity, which is PHV, is almost your starting point, and that is when the player traditionally or on average reach maximum height. And that's actually at the height of puberty. So this represents as a player goes into that growth spurt, they reach puberty, and then it's post-puberty as you come back down the opposite side. So what we're looking at here is the windows of trainability. So if you're working with 6 and 7-year-olds, it's important to understand what kind of physical movements or fundamental movement skills should you be focusing on. This is available on Physical Health and Education Canada and also on Canada Sport for Life. So it's important to remember that these are young children. They're not professional athletes or miniature adults. So trial and error and deliberate play, so playful games environments, is essential to ensure players develop that intrinsic motivation for physical activity. Kids aren't professional athletes, so programs must meet their needs, which is play. Children play sport for fun. So although there's a huge emphasis and requirement on developing physical literacy, we must ensure it's a fun and enjoyable environment. So where do we start as coaches? It's important to recognise that there's 3 stages of development at the grassroots age groups, and the training requirements for each of these stages is completely different. So if we start with active start, which is for children ages 3 and 4 years old, interactive physical literacy is the #1 form of competition, and the full premise and aim of the program is to get them active and allow them to explore a variety of different movement skills, and ultimately 50 to 75% of the training session should be aimed at physical literacy and the development of those fundamental movement skills. As we move into the older age groups, you see the focus does shift. Agility, balance, coordination, which is A, B, C and S, is relative throughout fundamentals, learn to train, and even into that older age group, and that relies back on the windows of trainability. So fundamentals, flexibility, and that speed 1, which agility, balance, coordination and speed, is important that we start to expose children to those types of fundamental movement skills, but in that deliberate play environment. And as we move to learn to train, we're looking to refine the movement skills and really emphasize the speed, and that is pre-puberty. So just a couple of examples of what we're looking for in terms of a deliberate play environment where players can try different things, experiment. So this is active start age group, and this is an introductory level. The objective is just to get the kids moving, to keep them active. Allowing these kids to be active and creative will lead to them having fun in a positive, safe environment, and will allow them to grow and fall in love with the game. So that's what we want. We want them to come back. So interactive physical literacy is the underlying form of competition for both male and female players at 3 and 4 years of age. So this activity in general is, we've got the coach. The yellow players, by the way, represent adults. So at this stage of development, we recommend that the adults are involved with the young children in all activities and all training sessions. So what happens, is each player has a ball. They bring the ball to the coach throws it away or kicks it away, and the player must go and retrieve the ball. So right away you can add different tasks like how you move to go and get the ball. It could be running, it could be crawling, it could be hopping on one foot, but essentially it's a deliberate play environment where you're disguising the workload, which we're working on is that fundamental movement skills, agility, balance, coordination, etc. Again, one we all played when we were younger, What's the Time Mr. Wolf or What's the Time Mrs. Wolf, is a great way to again disguise the work that you're doing in terms of physical literacy. It can be done with or without the ball, and very easily the players start on one side of an area, and the coach calls out, or the players all call out, "What's the time, Mr. Wolf?" and they take as many steps as the coach says. If the coach turns around, they'll run back. So it's a great way of disguising it and making it child friendly. For the fundamental age group, so we're moving into the older age group, and skill development at this stage becomes more structured, but still focusing on creating a positive, fun environment where agility, balance, coordination plus speed really is emphasised. So coaches should create that stimulating environment through, again, deliberate play, and here it's just a tag game. This is a great game for any warm-up situation, just allowing the players to play tag. They can be creative. There's lots of cognitive processing involved, and also working on fundamental movement skills. So this one here, basically the players are just playing throw and catch between each other, so working on something a little bit different from soccer skills, but again, it's holistic, physically literate players we're looking to develop, and all they're doing is throwing the ball and moving inside the area to each other. Now, how you can be creative and allow the players to take the lead, you could ask them what kind of different throws they could do, or they could show you. They could jump and throw the ball while in the air. They can throw the ball after a forward roll. So again, working on the fundamental movement skill of falling over, getting back up, but in a disguised, playful and child-friendly environment. So looking at learn to train, which is the final stage of development. This is a great example. It's called the huddle, and essentially you have 4 players, so 3 blue and a target player. The target player would pop a penny in the back of their shorts, and they would link hands. And then you would have 1 player who's a chaser, and their job is to try and steal the penny from the target player. As the chaser is chasing, the other players are all working together to protect this target player from the chaser and deny them the opportunity to steal the penny. So you're looking at the ability, agility, balance, coordination, speed. You're even starting to look at on the female side that endurance or stamina, which becomes a window of trainability around the age of 11 years old. So it's a great way to add that social aspect, that cooperation and communication. And we've actually got this as a video on our website, so if you feel free to check that out along with the other resources we have. And finally, another example, getting more like the game of soccer, is handball. Handball, working on a variety of different fundamental movement skills, but also the cognitive processing that's involved in executive function. So it's really focusing on physical literacy. Nothing is done in isolation here. It's a game. Players are creative. and it's a fun environment. So what we have here is we have the red team versus the blue and red, which I guess is like Barcelona. So we have Manchester United versus Barcelona, 3 versus 3, playing on the same field as blue versus yellow. So again, really overloading the cognitive capacity of the players and really challenging them in their creativity and problem-solving ability, but at the same time making it a game. So we're not doing anything in isolation. So where specifically does physical literacy fit into your session? Well, depending on the age group, at the active start and fundamentals, it is a little bit more, but throughout grassroots soccer, we must be striving to give players 25% of the session dedicated to developing physical literacy. So if you look at the player development model, which is our preferred training model in Ontario and Canada, so we have 2 games going on to give the players what they want, which is that free play environment. We also have an activity which focuses more on developing the technique of the player. But then the other station, Station A in this example, would be focusing specifically on the fundamental movement skills. So that could be anything from, if we go back, it could be a game of handball, it could be this sort of example, it could be catch and throwing the ball, or a game of tag. So there's lots of different examples. Coaches can be creative, but the idea is to focus on developing that physical literacy, which is multi-sport. So it's not just soccer specific or training environments. They have to cater to players to ensure that they have that holistic experience of developing physical literacy. Another thing that we highly recommend, and science backs this up, there's huge amounts of research being done in Europe regarding the benefits of playing multi-sport. So children can play a variety of different sports and are exposed to a variety of different movement skills. So it does benefit us from a soccer perspective to have our players engage in as many sports as possible. Soccer is early engagement but late specialisation, and this essentially means that most soccer players come to the sport at a very young age, usually 4 or 5 years old, and get their first sort of tastes of the sport. However, it's late specialisation, which means that regardless of how young they engage in the sport of soccer, it's not. It shouldn't become a priority and prioritise soccer over any other activity until around the ages of 14, 15 years old. Lots of benefits, like prevents burnout. One of the biggest reasons why young players are dropping out of the game is burnout, both mentally and physically. If you're playing soccer 12 months of the year, 4 or 5 times a week, it really does become almost job-like for young children. So it's great to give them that mental break and allow them to expose them to other sort of activities and other sports. Physical burnout, if you're constantly playing soccer at a young age, year after year, you start to overuse your joints, which aren't fully developed, overuse muscles. So it really does start to take its toll on the body, especially some young children who are still developing. And finally, multisport doesn't hinder elite development. There's actually numerous examples of young, successful professional athletes, world-class athletes, who are multi-sport athletes. So it really actually benefits players. It doesn't hinder elite development. So players don't have to be in a soccer environment 11, 12 months of the year to make the national team. So there's absolutely zero correlation between that. So don't think that multi-sport hinders elite development. So one of our good friends, Dr. Martin Toms, who does a lot of research in this area from Birmingham in England, he actually tweeted this out. If your child could only study one subject at school, you'd worry about their development and missed opportunities for them to learn new skills. So why for some sports coaches is early specialisation perceived as acceptable? And I think that's a great thing to just give it a different perspective to the argument, that if your kid was only studying one thing, I'm sure all of us wouldn't be happy. So it's the same with sport and the acquisition of physical literacy. I've been told, I've not been in Canada long enough to know who this guy is, but I've been told he was half decent at hockey. And Wayne Greztky was a big advocate of playing multi-sport. It kept him fresh mentally and physically, so that when he went back into his hockey season, he was fresh and ready to go. I'm only joking about Wayne Greztky. I do know who he is, so no one get upset. Jackie Robinson, another athlete. He was a multi-sport athlete until throughout his university career, until he decided to specialise in the one sport after his college. Gary Neville, those of you soccer fans or Manchester United fans will be familiar with him. He actually had the choice when he was 18 to either become a professional cricketer or to pursue a career in soccer. And I think we'll all agree that he had a very decorated career and he probably chose the right path. But again, it emphasises that elite world-class athletes don't have to specialise at a young age. So I think physical literacy, a little bit of a spelling error up there, I apologise. So physical literacy is a journey. It's from cradle to grave, as Dr. Whitehead puts it. It's not just about giving players the ability to play a sport. It's about equipping them with the ability and the confidence and competence to access a wide variety of activities as they mature and as they grow up. So in order for our future generation to remain active and healthy, it's imperative that we do our job and we provide them with access to environments that develop those physical literacy abilities. So just to tie up this evening's webinar, the key takeaways, it's important to recognise that obesity rates are increasing. So we can't deny it, only 9% of Canadian children are getting the recommended physical activity daily, which is 60 minutes. Physical activity doesn't equal physical literacy. Neither does fundamental movement skills equal physical literacy. We must train players in environments that are going to cognitively challenge them with problem solving and decision making, at the same time working on fundamental movement skills. So nothing happens in isolation. 77%, as we said earlier, play sport in Canada, but only 44% are physically literate. And physical literacy is a journey from cradle to grave. So recognise that windows of trainability and disguise the work. Deliberate play is the #1 form of development of physical literacy, and I think we only have to think back to previous generations and how they were physically literate without focusing on fundamental movement skill isolated training. It was all through play, climbing trees, playing in the park with your friends, falling down and getting back up. I think we can all reminisce on the benefits that we had in our childhood. There is a huge benefit of playing multi-sports, and I think that what we could do as youth organisations and youth coaches is work hand in hand with each other. So the local soccer team and the local hockey team, for example, could maybe get together and make sure that young players aren't having to choose soccer over hockey or hockey over basketball, soccer over basketball, etc. So maybe if soccer trains on a Tuesday, the hockey programs wouldn't train on a Tuesday. So it's about getting together and having a collaborated effort to ensure young players aren't forced to make a choice at such a young age between various sports. There's numerous resources available on our website, lots of practice videos, practice plans that will give you a lot more detail in terms of physical literacy activities than I was able to tonight. So if you have a chance, or if you've not already done so, I do encourage you to get online. And likewise, if you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us. My email is going to pop up in the last slide. So if you need anything, please give me a shout. So today was May 10th, incorporating physical literacy with myself. The next webinar is next month. We have a special guest, Dr. Tracy Valancourt. She's going to discuss psychosocial development of grassroots players. And Tracy is a research chair at the University of Ottawa. So we're very privileged to have someone with her background join us on June 10th. So I would encourage you to sign up if you haven't already done so. So thank you. Hopefully this evening was beneficial. If you do have any questions, we will answer them as soon as I'm finished. I'll jump on the question box and I'll be able to hopefully answer the majority of your questions. As I said, my email address is bwilson@ontariosoccer.net. Should you have any questions, please get in touch. We have staff who are busy across the province, and we'd be more than happy to connect with you and help you out as best we can. Likewise, if you want to follow us on social media, we tweet a lot of our resources out, and that's my handle in the bottom right hand corner. So thank you this evening, and hopefully you enjoyed the webinar.